Greetings from Boston. My name is Steve Spear. I'm a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management and author of the book, The High Velocity Edge. Thanks for taking time with me during this conference. The new normal. Why are we even talking about a new normal? Well, the reason is the old normal has been thrown up in the air. New technology, new economics, new strategic environment, new politics, and of course, with the added mix of COVID disrupting everything even further for the last 2 years. What that says is that our old normal, the one we were familiar with, doesn't give us the experience, it doesn't give us the precedence, it doesn't give us the mental models to figure out what to do going forward. So, given all that turbulence, what do we need to do? Well, one can imagine that for some people, in a period of great uncertainty, what do they want to do? Because it's uncomfortable for them. They want plans, they want detailed plans, they want comprehensive plans, they want far-ranging plans, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year plans. But there's a basic issue with plans. Plans are essentially fragile. And just to illustrate the point, let's step out of the economics, the business, the political, just to the biological. So there's a US cross-country skier, guy's world-class, named Chris Freeman. Chris has the distinction not only of being a world-class athlete, of which there are very few already, but he's a world-class athlete with type 1 diabetes, which is even fewer. Now, here's what happens with Chris. Every single day for him, like all diabetics with type 1 diabetes, is that they have to have a very planned existence. They have to figure out what their activities will be through the day and by the minute, by the hour, what their energy consumption will be, what their insulin dosage will be. And they have to stick to that plan with really a tremendous amount of rigor and discipline. Otherwise, things go all sorts of kablooey, hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia, whatever else. Stick to the plan. Well, anyway, here's Chris, 2020 Olympics. He's in the 30-kilometer race. And he's halfway through, and there he sees he's in second place, and you can see the gold medal contender right in front of him. And what happens? Well, he's a world-class athlete, so what does he do? He accelerates. He's got a shot at gold. The other thing, of course, it's protective, because if he slows down, he might slip from silver to bronze and maybe even out of medal contention. But what's the problem for Chris, type 1 diabetic? He hadn't planned to accelerate at the 15-kilometer mark of this 30-kilometer race, and it threw everything out of whack. What happens? He starts accelerating because he has to stick to this plan. He goes hypoglycemic. His blood sugars start crashing. And Chris, instead of catching up to the guy in first place, he flops down on the snow, hypoglycemic. Now, fortunately, a German coach recognizes what's going on, races over, gives Chris some sugary drink, raises his blood sugar level, and he gets back into the race to finish, but in 45th place. That would not have happened to someone without type 1 diabetes, but would have happened then with the dynamic system of blood sugar control and exertion and all of this thing and that thing. All the biological processes either would have allowed that racer to catch up and get into first place, or to know to slow down and not hit the wall and crash. But Chris didn't have that luxury of these dynamic systems making these adjustments when he needed. The Soviet economy was a centralized planned economy with these elaborate schedules of what to make, when to make, what to sell, at what price, this and that. Hypothetically, I'm sure it was very appealing to the Kremlin to think that they had so much control and so much foresight over what was going to go on. What's the problem? Well, weather, harvest, demand, needs. You're trying to have this highly planned system in an environment which is inherently unstable and unpredictable. And they have an unadaptive mechanism for a highly demanding system. And we know how that story ends. So what's the punchline on planned systems? Planned systems promise stability and predictability. But here's the thing, they only work in situations of extreme stability and predictability. But we're in an environment now which is neither stable nor predictable. We need something else. What I want to offer is something else, is dynamic systems. Systems which are characterized by their ability to recognize problems, to solve problems, to have this dynamic learning. And again, not just at the center, but distributed around the edges. So we've already seen, when we already should have some inspiration for that. Because here we're in a period, even before COVID, of extreme technological change, political change, economic change, on and on. And what we've seen is that some organizations have been wildly successful at managing during this period of great instability and great change, and others have really suffered and haven't kept pace nearly at all. So what's going on? What's going on? Well, given the time we have, just one example is that those who have excelled have figured out how to take advantage of the intelligence distributed throughout their whole enterprise, create the conditions in which people, all people ideally, can give full expression to their inherent creativity towards some common purpose, and they win. And those organizations which have not created the conditions in which people can give full expression to their creativity, they've lost. Let me give one example of one of the strategies, at least, to allow this full expression of inherent creativity. What we call is center out versus top down. So think of this, and it's maybe familiar to many of you. You've got an enterprise, it's got distributed operations, a branch over here, a factory over there, an outlet over here, a hospital over here, whatever it is, you've got distributed operations. And you have three alternatives amongst which you can choose in terms of how you manage those distributed operations. Alternative one, let them do what they want. It's kind of a portfolio approach. You let the managers and the employees at those distributed operations do their own thing without much guidance from headquarters. At the end of the day, maybe it's the end of the quarter, the end of the year, you just tally up the results and you give out your gold stars, your silver stars, your bronze stars, you win, you lose, that kind of thing. Another alternative, this is alternative number two, is that at headquarters, you say, oh, hold on, we don't want any of that kind of chaos. We want control. So what we're going to do is we're going to develop policies. We're going to create procedures. We're going to create plans. And until we do that, we don't want you to do anything. But when we do, we're going to push those out to you. And your job, when we've given this command of the plan, the policy, the procedure, is you comply. And we're going to audit you to make sure that you're following it well. Now, we all know how that happens, is that even under normal circumstances, as we saw with Chris Freeman, as we saw with the Soviet economy, kind of this top-down policy, procedure, plan, command, control, compliance, audit thing, it doesn't work all that well, even when the turbulence is kind of a mild, quote unquote, normal turbulence. When things are really up in the air, it doesn't work well at all. So that gives us our third alternative, and this is the one we want to talk about a little bit further, is push out to the edges, the opportunity to fully engage the brain power that's out there, to experiment, to explore, to try things. And what does the center do? The center has a purpose here. The center there, first of all, create the conditions, create the culture where this experimentation, this exploration on the edge, it's the thing to do. Push out whatever is best known that the center has privileged access to, push that out, and then do the drawing in of lessons learned, individual lessons, so they can be synthesized into an ever better shared best understanding of how to proceed. We've had examples of this, we've lived through them. So for example, when COVID hit, this is, in the US, we became really, really aware of it, February, March 2020, when things really started to shut down. The government said, all right, we got to shut down now because we don't know how this disease vectors and on and on. Said, but we'll start opening things up slowly when we have tests, so we know who can go out and who has to stay in. And when we have vaccines, when everyone can go out with more normalcy to their existence. Well, one would expect that it's easier to test than to vaccinate for COVID. And except that wasn't the experience we had in the United States. In the United States, it took a very, very long time to get a meaningful test. And the vaccine, on the other hand, people were predicting back in March 2020, you got to wait a year. This will come in 2022, maybe 2023. Where did we get the vaccine? In a year. It was amazing. And why is that? Well, it's this sort of top-down, center-out difference. The planning, the control approach versus the distributed experimentation. A few brains in the game versus many. In the case of the Centers for Disease Control, they said they were responsible for the test. They said, look, we're the world experts in infectious disease, which is true. And because of that, this was the mistake, we're going to be the ones who develop the test. You all wait for us. Once we develop the test, we're going to push it out. We'll tell you what the test is. We'll tell you how to test, when to test, who to test, all of that. Here's the problem, that they had an imperfect understanding of how to develop a test. Of course, it was a new disease. So what ends up happening, they go down a dead end, but they got no backup. They got no other recourse. So they had to start again. And what happened on the vaccination side? The Food and Drug Administration, they said, look, we're the world expert on issues related to safety and efficacy and testing for all that. And we got a huge amount of knowledge about disease just in general and vaccines in general. But look at all the brain power and all these pharmaceutical companies that day in, day out, they make vaccines. So what did the FDA do? They said, you all everyone try and come up with a vaccine, figure out what'll work, what won't work. And we'll pull in the best ideas and then cycle them out again. It was a center out, distributed, more democratic, more inclusive approach to experimentation and exploration. And we had this recurring. We had it with schools and whether schools could open or not. The school systems where the chief said at headquarters, wait for the policies, wait for the procedures, wait for the plans, which will push out command, control, compliance, and audit. They stayed closed a year and a half. The schools that, the school systems where the center said, look, we need everyone's brains involved to figure out how to mask, how to socially distance, how to run a class at in-person, hybrid, this thing, that thing. They were able to open up within 3-6 months, something like that. It was fantastic. Anyway, where are we? This center out approach has all the advantages of getting everyone's brain into the game where the top down doesn't. This dynamic learning approach gets everyone's brain into the game where the planning, the policy making, the procedure making approach, it doesn't. But it does come with a risk, right? Because if we're the type of folks who like to plan, we have to have control. We like to feel that we're in charge. The planning approach is very, very attractive. It's not effective, but it's very attractive, which means that we as leaders have to internalize the idea that we aren't going to be in a position to tell people what to do. We're going to be in a position where we have to cultivate a certain set of creative behavior amongst people. Maybe we're not used to doing that before. But here's the promise, right? It works. It works. It works for the schools that opened. It worked for the FDA with the vaccination. It worked for Google. It works for Amazon. And the alternative, it doesn't work for those other folks. Anyway, I just want to say thank you. I hope these ideas were helpful. I'd like to hear back from you as to what worked, what didn't work, et cetera, and so forth. And be safe, be well, and good luck. So long from Boston.